Good morning and welcome to our Monday morning message. This is our weekly COVID-19 update. I think most of you will remember this was our weekly COVID-19 political update. And when COVID-19 originally emerged, we were focused on the issues that were coming out of Washington, D.C. and with our government to help our businesses. Now the broader community has gotten involved, and we want to make sure that everyone knows that this is an update that all of you can take part in and participate. We also want to remind you of our Trending Thursdays tips. We initiated 2 virtual sessions at the onset of COVID-19 to keep our women informed and connected. This Thursday, we are kicking off the 3rd quarter with the final SBA rule around WSOBs and EDWSOBs. Now, ladies, what you should know is that rule takes effect on July 15th. So this is another timely conversation. If you are looking to do business with the federal government or you are doing business with the federal government, this is a session you will not want to miss. So that's Trending Thursday Tips on Thursday, July 2nd, just before we go into the 4th of July holiday. Mark your calendar. It is 6:30 to 7:30 Central Time. And now I want to begin our program by welcoming our guests, Dr. Eve Chaki and Anna Clark. Ladies, welcome. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, VR.
Good morning. I hope you all took the time to review their bios. These ladies are doing some fantastic work in our community. And when I started thinking about what was the next thing that we needed to look in, I thought it has to be something more inclusive. What could be more inclusive than inclusive economies? It's a concept that we haven't spent a lot of time looking at, and some people don't even understand what it is. So I think this is the absolute way to start this conversation. Is either let's talk about a definition. What is inclusive economies, and how does it relate to inclusive business? And why are we using that terminology, climate smart? I know you could tell us.
Thank you so much, VR, for having us. And thank you so much for all the amazing work that you're doing at the center, building an inclusive economy. And thank you for serving on the leadership council of the Inclusive Economy Consortium. So we very much value all that you are and you have been doing. And to answer your question, both inclusive economy and inclusive business are concepts that are aimed at including those who have limited access, including them in market mechanisms and inclusive and economic opportunities. And really, if you don't mind, I would love to give you just a little bit of a historical context of how these concepts have evolved. And it was almost 20 years ago when C.K. Prahalad published his book, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. And the notion of that book was, and now we call this more base of the pyramid as opposed to bottom of the pyramid, but the notion was that there is a $5 trillion market that is out there of people who we or businesses may consider low income, but once you think of them as a market segment, they represent very significant needs and demand. And there is viable business to be done focusing on that market segment. And that was a revolutionary idea at the time. And Prahalad's work, when he quantified and when he articulated this $5 trillion market, he really just focused on developing countries. And this was really more of a book that was talking about the opportunities in these less developed countries in the world. And sure enough, it got a lot of traction, and many of the people in the audience might have heard of Unilever's Shakti program, where basically Unilever started selling cosmetics and various products in smaller packaging in rural India. And they used a network of rural women from the villages, trained them to be their workforce and the merchants. And those women would go in a culturally appropriate way, door to door or village to village, selling some of these products. And it was incredibly successful. And that was one of the early examples of inclusive business, because it basically said, look, there is this market we are not tapping into. There are many, many millions of people in rural India who have no access to these products. So let's figure out how we can do that. Let's modify our business model so we can tap into that market. And along the way, let's create economic opportunities for the same population, because obviously if these women are participating in this business model, they are earning money, they have disposable income to then spend on some of these products. So it's a holistic concept in that way. Now, some of these early inclusive business concepts did not take environment and climate into consideration, and that became an issue, and I'll come back to that. So really, inclusive business started in this developing market context, and thinking of this untapped huge market potential that Prahalad articulated. Now, ironically, this concept did not really take off in the advanced countries. And I always found that to be curious of why were we thinking of inclusive business as purely a developing market concept. And when we think of what has happened over the last 20 years, technology and globalization are very often identified as the main forces behind the fast economic progress, but also a force behind the rising inequality that we have been experiencing around the world. And in some ways, many people accepted that inequality as something inevitable. And it really wasn't until 2018 when two economists from Oxford did a very, very provocative study when they looked at advanced countries, Western European countries and the US, and basically said, look, if really technology and globalization were the inevitable culprit behind inequality, then that means that all of these countries should be similar in terms of inequality and the lack of inclusive economy. And what they found was very different. They found huge differences. And I have to say the US fared very poorly. The US is one of the least inclusive economies among advanced countries. So that has really highlighted the importance in also developed countries for us to focus on this, and not to mention this recent crisis that has really brought to surface some of these issues. It is highlighting the importance of us focusing on inclusive economy, which includes inclusive business. We want to see those inclusive businesses happen, but increasingly we are cognizant to the fact that in order to create an economic system that will help businesses thrive and pursue those inclusive models, there is more that needs to be done.
I want to cut you off for 1 second because I want you to just go back and give me that simple, if there is such a thing, of inclusive economy, so that our attendees, if they want to have a conversation in a local community, or they want to share some information, and they want to start having a conversation about inclusive economies, what are they talking about?
Inclusive economy will be an economic structure and an economic system that will foster inclusive business, that will foster inclusive solutions, that will help reduce inequality and make sure that everybody has access to economic opportunities, access to good jobs, access to education. Inclusive economy is all about access.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Eva. And so, Anna, Eva was just getting into the whole inclusive business. So, how does this differ from corporate philanthropy, for example?
So by way of just explaining a little bit more about the distinction, I'll just share briefly how Eva and I came to work together, because it kind of comes back to that question about what is the distinction between inclusive business and CSR, corporate social responsibility. My career in CSR is how I came to get to work with Eva, which was very, very transformative in understanding the bigger picture of what I was working in when I did some communication strategy and writing for IFC, which is where she was working in her World Bank capacity, and understanding more at the systems level and global level what was possible in terms of truly transformational work when you can align financing and the different stakeholders together so they can come up with solutions that truly do move the needle for renewables and so forth. It was mind blowing. And I realized, all of this time in Dallas, Texas, when I've been carving out my little consultancy and corporate social responsibility, I had not really gotten to see what it could look like to actually be part of the change at that level. And so when Eva came here to work in Dallas and lead the Hunt Institute for Engineering and Humanity, it was just this remarkable opportunity to get to work with a global leader and true pioneer in inclusive economic development here in DFW. And coming to understand just how vast our economy is here. DFW is the fourth largest economy in the nation, but then we're also one of the highest, if not the highest, in inequality. It just seems like a perfect opportunity to have somebody like her work here to apply these concepts. And so they are difficult to understand, and it's taken me years of getting to work with her to appreciate it, which is a little bit kind of what we'll get to later around the model itself, that we can help people demystify this and plug in. But just kind of going back to your question about the difference is corporate social responsibility is by definition it's business tracking, at least meeting the expectations society has at a given time for corporations. And the reason why that is important is because business is not operating in a vacuum. We do impact, the commercial sectors we know impacts the environment and has many externalities that are not accounted for. And so it's so important that companies at least meet societal expectations. And so we saw a huge rise of that in the last 15 years around the environment. And that's how the corporate sustainability movement came about. And it was, CSR was originally grounded in ethics back to the 50s and even before. So it's a very exciting way to use the market to affect social change in a positive way. But it has not always been, and often is not, transformative. It just doesn't necessarily address those barriers to access. And some of the things that I felt the pain of myself as a micro entrepreneur, have this huge vision around making business more sustainable. And yet I'd come up against the very barriers that made it impossible to stay in business and succeed in that kind of setting. The procurement departments require you to have a certain kind of insurance. If you don't have the scale to work with big brands, you're really going to be stuck on the sidelines. And that frustration drove me to look for answers. And coming to work with Eva, I started to understand the different ways that these entities can work together to bring about true transformation, which is our aim with inclusive business. And there's so much more we could get into, but that is the difference, is really incremental change and just being part of society's expectations versus going beyond that to include environment and many more people in the value chain of these companies.
So I love what you're saying. Can you give us an example? Give us an example of somebody that's possibly doing it right or moving in the right direction.
Well, we have been studying a lot of different companies. I mean, for years. There's so many examples. It's really hard to pull just one. So, I mean, one local example we could point to is, Toyota does a phenomenal job in this respect. They work with trying to address systemic problems
Mhm.
and aligning the nonprofits that they try to support to address like multifaceted solutions, so that if you have people who, in one case we studied, the company was trying to improve the opportunity for women, and they pulled together a coalition of nonprofits that address the need for affordable housing, transportation, childcare. And by trying to encourage more nonprofits to work together as opposed to, in competition with one another, they were able to convene partners that could truly create a systemic solution to one social problem. So that's one of other examples. And I know Eva's got many more.
But no, that is such a good example, because it's one of the things we have to tell our colleagues in the industry all the time. A business is not a thing. Many businesses are people. And so these people don't live in a vacuum. So they have, like you said, housing issues, daycare issues, healthcare issues. And if those issues are predominant in their life and they're overlaying or overriding everything that they're trying to do at work, how can they focus? How can their performance be optimum? And so we have to look at the situation in a very holistic way. And we have a lot of people that still just haven't gotten on to that. It's like, oh, we're just going to deal with business, and we're not going to deal with the people that are in business and the issues that impact them. So it's a lot of, like you said.
Yes. I mean, as a working mom myself, VR, I went through all those same things, and realizing that, as we as a society start to look at those areas where some of us have had more fortune or opportunity, a lot of it is just recognizing it's a privilege to have child support, and my mother often was able to care for my young ones back then, but not everybody even can rely on that. And with people working at, further on as they age and advance in the society, we have to keep working. Not so many can retire. That we have got to transform everything if we're going to make our economy work. And that's what the aim of the inclusive economy.
You know what, you led me right into my question with Eva, because Eva, and this is a hard question, Eva, but why is this so hard? Why is more not happening? Why? Because it sounds simple. Anna just gave us a great example. We know that this is what's going on, but still it's not happening at the level or at the pace that we know it should happen. So what's going on?
So I think there are two reasons. One of them is that this is complex. The underlying problem, if we think of the underlying problem being inequality and the aim being economic inclusion, this is a complex issue with many different factors that interact with one another. You cannot have a cookie cutter solution to it. So I love the example that Anna gave, because that was a great example when you said, okay, here we have a complex problem, so we have to have a holistic, multifaceted solution to it. And so that is a very different way of doing business, rather than just doing the cookie cutter business as usual, whether it is nonprofit or for-profit that somebody is doing. So it is really, and we have found, so Anna and I spent years studying some of the successful examples from around the world and trying to figure out, what do they have in common? What is it that helped them succeed? And one of the things that we found is that there is a role for, we call it enabler, somebody who can actually analyze the system as a whole, look at it and say, okay, what are these different pieces that are necessary? And ideally that enabler should be somebody who has the influence to actually bring all those people to the table. Mm-hmm. And that's what we see, is that because these are complex problems, in order to really come up with meaningful solutions and meaningful ways of addressing them, there has to be that multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder dialogue and co-creation of solutions. And the other reason why I think not enough of this is happening, especially in a place like the US, is because this is so different from business as usual. And it's very hard for businesses to change their ways. They have established, it's also true for nonprofits. In my experience, many of the large well-established nonprofits have an incredibly hard time, even harder than businesses, to change how they do business. And this is something to shift our mindset, to shift our mentality in this direction. Everybody will have to shift their mindset, both for-profit businesses and nonprofits alike, and funders. I also find that there is also a lack of awareness sometimes among the funders out there.
It is. I think that was such a great point, Eva, because the bottom line on this is leadership. I mean, we talk and we use this term collaboration so much, but people aren't really collaborating on an equal standing where that something is going to be there for everyone. There's always this unbalance. And we're going to have to learn how to come to table and truly collaborate to meet the need, that everyone has that end point of meeting that need. And Anna, we were just having this conversation about funding. I worked in a corporate environment, and we were talking about how when we start projects, the first thing that's laid out is how much money. Yeah. The next thing is laid out is how much staff. And then we begin dividing up, like, what are the tasks and what is this project is going to look like? And it's so funny when you have these conversations with corporations and you're talking about your nonprofit and people are saying to you, oh, okay, that's great. How much more can you do with nothing? And it's just kind of like, it makes you kind of like, you have to, these are the things that leave you speechless when you say, we all work in the same environment, and that's not the way work gets done. And it's one of the reasons, Anna, we were talking about why we're not seeing the performance outcomes we want, because we're not putting the support behind it. We're not putting the money, we're not putting the staff behind these programs that we want to perform. And that's why long-term, we're still not seeing the outcomes that we want, because long-term, we're still functioning in an outdated process of how we look at nonprofit. It is an industry that is expected to perform. It is not expected to live in the red. It's expected to break even or even bring some money back into its program, but it's not funded that way. And that's kind of odd. So Anna, let's talk a little bit about what you've learned. Explain this CAISE case model. What's that all about?
Wow, you made me, we could just go on and on about that, the funding conversation for nonprofits.
I wanted to get off my soapbox and come back down.
No, so, one of the things that, among the just many barriers to doing anything together, there's so many reasons why this isn't just happening on its own. The tragedy of the commons is, a thing that's been a problem for a long time. The idea that it's no one person's job, or they're not paid often to protect that which is common to us all. And so we all are now seeing the effects of that. So when Eva and I started working together, she really taught me a lot about the importance of this concept of collective action. And that really filled in some gaps for me, because I realized, working on my own, working very hard, trying to overcome all those barriers and make my projects as important as possible and all of those things. Doing that alone and in a silo, you'll just never, ever have the kind of impact you want. And then, change management programs, of which sustainability is often like that, they have 70% failure rate. So one day the light bulb went off, and I just thought, I have to do something differently if I truly want to be part of the change, which those of us who classify as change agents or social entrepreneurs, that's our driving motivation, not just making profits. We just understand that business is the best mode to a wonderful vehicle for having that impact. So
wait, Anna, you just spoke about social entrepreneurship. Why don't you give a little bit of definition and some info on that? Because I know people get really confused when we start talking about social entrepreneurship and what that looks like and how it differs.
Well, that's a good way to kind of speak to one part of the model that we're talking about. And just to backtrack, CASE stands for Collective Action for an Inclusive, Sustainable Economy. So the model that Eva and I put together is basically a synthesis of our thinking, which in Eva's world, she comes from international development and policy, and I come from, more commercial consulting, working in the private sector. So the idea that it takes all sectors coming together to make the difference, public, private, and nonprofit. So we three here are a good representation of that, even at a micro level. You have three people from different sectors who are coming together trying to make a difference. Well, blow that up, and that's kind of part of our model we call disruptive collaboration, which is 3 big stakeholder types: corporations, entrepreneurs, and enablers, which Eva spoke to earlier. And we'll get more into that because that's a very exciting role to play in all of this. So the entrepreneurs in our model is not unlike social entrepreneurs. It's really, what's your aim with your entrepreneurial venture? Is it only to make profit, or are you also interested in making an impact? And if that is you, then you are a social entrepreneur simply by virtue of wanting to be. There are different ways that can manifest in either a nonprofit situation or a for-profit, and we could get into all of that. But at the end of the day, it's really about using your business as a tool to create social impact as well. And so then just back to the model, and we can pause and go into it more, but the high level understanding I would want everybody here to is that this isn't an academic exercise, just creating a model to do it. I mean, there's a lot of journal articles out there that I've never read, and I'm still out there making a difference. I don't think it's about us trying to foist one more thing on people. This is truly a roadmap for how do we all work together in an interdisciplinary way across sectors, understanding, and language is a huge barrier in that. As we all know, I mean, the words we choose matter so much, and they differ across sectors vastly. Policy speak does not work in corporate. They don't want to hear it. They will shut down. Consumer speak is different than internal corporation speak, and so forth and so on. And so my background in sustainability communication tells me that 98% of cognition is unconscious. I mean, so many of the words we're having people trip people up in politics are because one word can trigger a cascade of frames in people's heads, and it's a barrier to getting anything done. So step one for us was, how do we come together and create a common language? That's what the model is. And we could get into the different elements because it's a little ponderous sounding if you're not really steeped in this, but actually once you are, you start to realize, oh, okay, that's a way. There's 4 pillars, 2 integrators, and 1 foundation. So we can get into all of that, but it's a helpful roadmap to enter into this space through any different discipline you want. Everybody has a role in climate smart inclusive economic development, and the model shows you how you can participate.
Awesome, Anna. So this question, we're almost halfway through. So this question is going to be for both of you ladies, and it's, how can we apply these concepts and ideas to this post-COVID-19? I think actually we're right in the middle of this, and we're not really post yet. So right now in the middle of this is a great time while we're looking at the change that's impacting everybody across the board. How do we start getting people in line to do or to think about inclusive economies, and maybe to even use the case model?
So I can go first if that's okay. So my experience suggests, and the work that Anna and I have been doing confirms that the system level is really important, that there is a supportive system for inclusive economy and inclusive business. And therefore, I feel that there are 2 stakeholders in particular who have a unique opportunity right now. One of them is the policymakers, and the other ones are the financiers. There is, especially a place like Dallas, there is a very, very generous philanthropic sector here. And I think they have a unique opportunity to say, we want the recovery. And I really hope we are already talking about, coming out of this and the recovery. But we want this recovery to create a better system. And in order for that to happen, we are going to tie our support and funding to the kind of opportunities that will help create that. And I do believe that the funders have a very unique opportunity to incentivize. They have an incentive. They have a way of incentivizing the creation of this inclusive economy. The policymakers, on the other hand, they have a very important role to play in terms of looking at the whole system and identifying where some of the barriers are. And they have the tools to address those barriers. So in my opinion, those two stakeholders really need to play a leadership role in this time. So to make sure that the system that we are creating is going to be more inclusive.
Okay. Anna?
So the stakeholders Eva's talking about would classify as enablers in our system, but an enabler can be a single catalyst, a consultant, a lot of the roles that we all play in this space all the time. And so just understanding the power of that role of the enabler, which is often the hidden kind of glue or connector that pulls different people together, that brings information to people. So the Inclusive Economy Consortium is our local kind of response to that idea of a coalition or a peer-based, sharing, knowledge sharing network that works with basically coalesces enablers in these different roles, whether it's in companies. We have members who are in companies. We have members who work for themselves. We have members in education, academia, and the city government. And the relationships that form there are the gateway to having a bigger impact, I think, because like you pointed out, VR, leadership, it's about the people. And people in my career have opened doors for me that the system itself would have stayed shut to. And I think we've all experienced that it's the relationships we build that lead to a lot of opportunity that is still not tapped, that we can open up for each other as long as we understand the needs that are out there. And so by even coming together and sharing knowledge, we hear from each other, get case studies presented to us, and we're able to kind of bring to bear a lot of social capital, financial resources through connections to foundations and so forth. And I think it's just really important that people recognize their role in this as an empowered one. You don't have to be a victim to the system if you understand the system and think, how do I pull these different levers? And a lot of it is just understanding where you can have the biggest impact. And that's never really alone. It's in community somewhere. So joining an accelerator or being part of our consortium or some other network is, step one to kind of discovering more for yourself than I think anyone's going to do just on their own struggling with this. And we have some other resources we can speak to as well.
Well, I think it's also widening your net. A good example is the incident that we had with the funding that came down from the federal government for businesses. The assumption was everybody was going to be on the same playing field. But when the money actually came down, banks decided, hey, I'm going to deal with my customers and they're going to get first choice at this. And a lot of small businesses who weren't doing businesses with banks were left out of the playing field. And even as we circle back around, you still have a lot of small businesses scrambling to get to the table and to get what they need. And then we also look at the fact that a lot of small businesses are hustling. They don't have a financial department. So their finances and the kinds of things that we're looking for them are not always the way that they should be for just to put it very simply. They're not always the way that they should be. So getting all those things together, being in that place, I think that one of the things we need to look at is, and I say this all the time, we don't need another t-shirt and a picture kind of photo op from our corporate people where you get 20 people out and we do a big thing. We say, yay, we gave back. Small businesses and nonprofits could really use that back-end expertise like accounting, IT, media and marketing, the kinds of things that they don't have people to bring on to do. Because what we've learned in the small business industry, or at least in the veteran community for me, our women know what they're doing. They know their product or they know their service. What they may not know is all the elements of running a business. And even once they learn them, that's a learning curve to develop that expertise to put all those elements in place. And if you're doing it all by yourself, it creates a drag on your business because you're not able to do your business. You're busy, doing all of these other back end things instead of really promoting, innovating, being cutting edge about getting your product or service out there. So when we think about that, is there any kind of good example, anything that you guys are working on and we can say, hey, here's a good example where we're moving in that direction? Because we have our national, our regional, as well as our local participants that come on and take part in our virtual sessions. So it's not everybody that's here in Dallas. They may be someplace else. And they're thinking, how does this apply to me? And how could I take this back to my community and make it relevant?
So just to respond to this example that you mentioned, VR, in terms of many small businesses struggling, or not struggling, but having challenges in some areas just because they don't necessarily have their marketing department and their accounting department and all that. I have seen really nice examples of corporations having an impact in that regard. Several corporations, and I do definitely consider this to be part of the inclusive economy ecosystem, when companies say, we have these in-house experts and we are willing to lend that expertise to nonprofits and small businesses. And it actually is a win-win situation because it brings much needed expertise to those nonprofits and small businesses. But at the same time, the people who tend to be these inside experts, internal experts in these companies, are typically mid-career, and they may have just spent 20 years in this company. They may be a little burnt out. They may be like, really, I'm doing the same old. And it's been shown that it is a very rewarding experience also for the provider. It's a very rewarding experience for them to engage. I know companies that actually let these experts go for, I think, up to 6 months. Some of them go to sub-Saharan Africa and work with some social enterprises and nonprofits there, again, lending their really unique set of expertise and skills to help those again, small business or social enterprise nonprofit to get to the next level in some area where they have value added to bring. And I think that's actually a really nice model and a nice example of that collaboration between, if we want to broadly define, social enterprise and corporations.
I like that, Eva. And I think we see that a lot on an international basis. Anna, how do we have more of that on a local or more of a national here in the US? Are you seeing more of that beginning to emerge, or how do we promote that more as one of the CSR strategies?
That's a fantastic question. I mean, we should see more of that. Unfortunately, a lot of companies, the reality is they may speak to programs like that, and some of them are successful at it, but most businesses still have that relentless productivity requirement that, frankly, does keep the lights on, and it's kind of important. And so I understand all of that. And not every company has that altruistic streak. The more innovative ones do, because they understand the need for this. They understand the brand benefits, but also the innovation that comes out of supporting smaller entrepreneurs or endeavors in the community. But regardless of all of that at the corporate level, there's another way in which you can kind of benefit from this capacity building or just extra brain power or support in your business. And one example is right here behind me in the company where my company operates, in a co-working environment called Good Work. And what I love about these new co-working spaces is not all of them have the same ethos, but this one is just phenomenal in that there's this communal kind of shared, I guess, aim for inclusive, sustainable development. It's just part of this place, part of the founders who created it. The people that come into this space share a lot of the same values. And so my business has used the photographer in-house. We've partnered with a journalist who works here and hired her for some things. And the same is true for a lot of the different entities inside of here. So The nice thing about that is that you're getting really good talent who understands the needs of your business if you're in the right kind of co-working environment, one where everybody sort of understands what you do and knows who you are. And it's a step above bartering. I mean, we're paying each other and hiring each other. But there are also built-in support mechanisms that the community here has to offer that add that capacity that I myself don't have, as the chief bottle washer of my own operation. And I'm grateful to the support staff at Good Work for enabling me to show up in a much more professional way in a startup setting. So I would recommend finding those opportunities where you can get capacity added to you just by virtue of the people who are supporting your, workplace.
I would love to just, VR, if you don't mind, I would love to just emphasize something that Anna said, because it's second nature to her, but she mentioned the brand benefit. And I think it cannot be emphasized enough that in that collaborative situation between corporation and social enterprise, there are very significant benefits for that corporation. And I highlighted more the example of staff retention through the satisfaction of these special projects to be able to keep some of their most seasoned, most experienced experts. But at the same time, there are tremendous benefits in terms of potentially there is business benefit. Maybe this social enterprise small business could be a potential acquisition target, maybe a potential supplier, but the brand benefits that is really Anna's expertise, and she has worked in this area quite a bit, I think are really important and significant. And so these are really win-win situations in the inclusive economy ecosystem.
Yeah, I wanted to give a plug because we had a relationship like that with Home Depot Technology Center. They actually did the logo for the Veteran Women's Enterprise Center. So they allowed us to immediately come on the forefront and be able to brand. And they did several different designs for us and colors and ideation, so that when we needed to brand our products and our brochures and things, we've always been able to do that. And I know for a lot of small businesses and even nonprofits, that's huge, branding. Not being able to brand yourself. And they also did the lead off for our website so that we'd have a place where people can go and see, hey, who is the Veteran Women's Enterprise Center? What are they doing? How are they connecting with people? And that is, it sounds small, but that's huge. Because for someone that doesn't know anything about your business and they want to take a moment and find out, is this someone I want to do business with? The first place they're going to go is to your website or your social media. And so not having those things are critical for a business or a small nonprofit. And then the second thing I wanted to do, I wanted to plug the Veteran Women's Enterprise Center because we also have co-working. Ours is female exclusive, but we are doing that same thing. It's application based. And we're really looking to build that environment so that the women can work together, so that they can do business together and have these collaborative relationships, and even move on to look at opportunities to do contracting and things together. So the vision from the very beginning is that this is going to be a place where people work together, not just a place where you come and work. And if you happen to make a relationship, yay, but a place that drives that really and pushes and encourage that you find these connections and build these relationships. And we found, this can be very difficult for women. I have to say, I have to admit, I know guys have gone and had a beer and the next day they're forming a partnership and they're going after a contract and they legitimately get it. And it takes women longer to build these relationships. So giving them these environments where they can build trust and build relationships, I think it's so important. And so we're seeing more and more of these environments. Go ahead,
I'm so excited by what you're saying. I just want to jump in on and make 2 points about back to back what you just said. First of all, on the relationships, I think that is just, it's so essential too. I mean, as we're all, as a society, dealing with systemic racism, I mean, I think one of the things that you and I talked about, VR, that was so interesting last week on this topic is, as I shared with you, I think the reason why the dialogue hasn't been more productive so far is because it was the elephant in the room. You don't talk about racism. It's not polite. It's not considered polite. And if anything positive is coming from the protest, it's that we're unleashing, finally kind of dropping that wall, and people are sharing their stories. And it's the personal stories from friends of mine who I met because of this work and social justice and social entrepreneurship, and understanding that my Black friends are suffering like this and starting to see why that sort of kind of woman to woman connection, fellow moms, people just like me, horrible stories that I was shocked by. And I thought, if more of us just had friends across, these different groups, then we would probably have stronger, more resilient networks that were, less inclined to kind of be of one type. And I know that's stating the obvious, but I think the part that wasn't obvious to me until I started to think about it was the the rarity with which we have been brought together sometimes. A lot of churches are still operating in a very segregated way, and churches should be the one place where the community really comes together and wants to make the difference. And those have traditionally been terribly segregated. It's the work that I've done through the Institute, and Eva has brought me into into community with, in many cases where I've met a lot of my African American friends. And then, of course, the amazing op-ed project that the three of us completed that fellowship. So those kind of communities of interest are essential. And that's also a part of what we're proud of with the Inclusive Economy Consortium. We want it to represent everybody because that's the point. And then one other thing on going back to branding, sorry, I know this is a lot, but I'm just so passionate about that one topic that I wanted to reinforce what you said on two sides. You have the importance of branding support for the small entity that absolutely needs that visibility and identity made for it in the marketplace. So any kind of support some company could give to a nonprofit or a small business on branding is tremendous. It's a wonderful place to have an impact. But then for corporations, it's also essential too that they get the word out about these stories. I was so interested in this when I opened this pizza that we bought, and Newman's Own is always known for its philanthropy. They give away 100% of their profits, and that's a really exciting thing. But yesterday I noticed that they were supporting the Farmer Veteran Coalition and telling a whole story of this nonprofit and how they're proud to support veteran-owned businesses and initiatives. And this company would not pay to put this story on the back of a pizza box if they didn't think consumers like me cared about that. Why? Because it all goes back to building brand equity, which is 80% of the value of a company now. So those stories matter. And if any nonprofit like yours or anyone's is doing a value to that company as well. And you should be asking for support and find more ways to make that partnership more meaningful. So it's not about greenwashing, it's about partnership. That is just our collaboration.
Absolutely. I think more companies need to see just what you said. The value of that branding, the value that nonprofit brings to the table as it relates to their customers feeling like this company's not just taking my money, but this company's taking my money and they're putting it to good use and you're helping other people with it. Customers, people, all of us, I want to do business with people who are doing good business and not just growing big and loading their pockets, but giving back and making an impact in our nation, in our community, and hopefully around the world. And so I think more corporations, I think more people are going to be looking at that now. As we move out of COVID-19, more people are going to be saying, well, what are you doing besides making money? Who are you helping? And I think we want to look at more consistency. These randoms, we do something once a year, we do something once every 2 years, doesn't help a business or a nonprofit plan and say, hey, who could I connect with that can help me? So doing these things and having more consistency and continuity in how they present them is extremely important. Eva?
I would love to make a follow-up point to what you ladies just said right now, because we tend to have, again, in the inclusive economy context, we tend to have this big emphasis on the base of the pyramid representing $5 trillion and what a great market opportunity, business opportunity that can be if targeted correctly. But we rarely talk about the reverse, which is exactly the point that you ladies made, which is there is power in being the consumer. And in the value chain context, we very often talk about the power dynamics, power asymmetries. And this is where consumers have power. There is a $5 trillion market power to influence the behavior of some of the entities along that chain. Because if the consumers express preference for certain characteristics, like Anna said, if that support for that veteran farming organization is going to sell more pizzas, that's an amazing evidence that, you know what, consumers care about that. So I think we really have to highlight the importance of this being a two-way street. It's a two-directional relationship where consumers have tremendous power to influence behaviors in the system if they stand for certain values. And it's been demonstrated as so many times, especially now in the technology age. This is again an example where technology can be actually very positive and very constructive, because with social media and the ease of communication, news travels very, very fast. And going back to the collective action point, people organize much more easily. Mm-hmm. So just over the weekend, Anna mentioned racism. I read a really interesting article that was talking about how certain companies in Africa were actually penalized by consumers because some of the racist advertising that they did. And basically very quickly over social media, consumers organized and said, look, we don't value that. We don't appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And again, it's that market power can speak for itself in today's day and age.
I think we're seeing a lot of that, Eva. And what I want to do, ladies, we do have a couple of questions. So I want to make sure our attendees get their questions answered. Anna, one of the questions here was, you said something about climate, smart, inclusive, and then the attendee missed the rest of it. Do you remember what you were speaking about when you mentioned climate, sure, smart, inclusive?
Yeah, climate, smart, inclusive economic development is the overall frame of what we're doing. And the model kind of breaks that down. And our website has all of these definitions on there, just so the attendees know. It's inclusive-economy.org. Yeah, we'd love to talk to anybody who's interested.
And so here we have another question. This attendee says, as a South Dallas nonprofit, we're looking to have our board look more like the community we serve. We cannot pay for capacity. We need our current level. How can we reach out to corporate support to help fulfill these needs?
Eva, do you want to?
Sure. So I think the emphasis needs to be on partnerships. My experience, at least, has been that that companies tend to value partnerships as opposed to ad hoc engagements. And so, therefore, I think what's important for a nonprofit or for a social enterprise is to identify in the ecosystem potential partners who are aligned with their work and with their values and with their philosophy, and establish those relationships. And then those relationships can translate into various different forms of actions. One of them could be representation on a board. But I think the emphasis needs to be really on more holistically partnership development with like-minded potential partners.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Eva. I found, and we used to do board development in New York, and I found that the board members that stay on the boards, particularly nonprofit boards, which are non-paying boards, are the ones that have a real partnership with that organization. They believe in what they're doing. They support what they're doing, not just in words, but financially. They're involved in one way or another, which means they come out, they volunteer. When you have a board member that's just in name, you may or may not keep that person because the connection is very fragile and it's very frail. So now what you want to do is start doing your own research. What corporations are doing good things in South Dallas? who has a connection, who really wants to make a difference, and then start reaching out to share what you guys are doing, get them involved in what you're doing. And the more they see the good work you're doing, the more they'll be open to saying, yeah, I'd like to take a leadership role. I'd like to be more involved with this organization. How can I help? And I hope that was helpful, Tracy. Are there any other questions? I only see the one in the questions, so we've gotten that one answered. Were there any other questions or comments? I'm also watching on Facebook Live. Welcome to everybody on Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us this morning. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions. Okay, ladies, do you have any final comments? You know, inclusive economy, COVID-19. We said in our thing, the journey ahead. What does the journey ahead look like?
So I will let Anna speak to journey ahead, but I would love to make a plug and just say a few words about the climate smart piece, because I don't think we did justice to that part of the topic, because this whole topic is just enormous. And I think it's really important to highlight that the people we are talking about, the ones where we are trying to promote access and inclusion, tend to be more vulnerable in our society, and therefore they are also more vulnerable to climate. And so the climate and inclusion pieces really go hand in hand. And in order for us to build resilience, we cannot just focus on inclusion. We really need to be also cognizant of the climate factor. And this is globally speaking, but Texas being one of the worst affected states in the US in terms of climate change, it's definitely true here as well. And we have lots of examples to illustrate this with, but I don't think we have enough time. So I will just pass it on to Anna.
So just a word on the journey ahead, at least as I see it. I think we probably, I'm not the only one who thinks there could be a void in leadership, but we don't have to wait for the federal government or any government to come save us. Market-based solutions do offer a lot of potential, as well as supporting each other. So the cavalry isn't coming, and I'm sorry, that's the way I see it. But on a very positive note, we as a peer-to-peer network are crowdsourcing resources and pulling together funding opportunities. You can go to our website and see a resources page that contains some links that could be very useful to entrepreneurs or nonprofits. And please do contact us, and let's all work together to kind of survive and thrive this pandemic.
So Anna has given the information, and Eva, to the Inclusive Economy Consortium here in Dallas, as well as once you get to that website, you can get all of their informations and links. You can also link up with them directly. The thing that I want to say to everybody is that you don't need to wait on someone else to make that move. You have the power to begin to reach out, to begin to collaborate, to literally lead in your own environment and say, we need to do something, and begin to be that we and do something, whether it's starting a collaborative conversation, talking to your political people about the changes that need to change or happen at a policy level, or reaching out to your different funders just to have a conversation. I think sometimes funders want to be engaged and not just say, give me money, but let's talk about that process. Let's talk about the impact you're really looking for. You know, what are the challenges that they think they have? Why aren't they giving more? What do they need to see in order to be more comfortable and feel more at ease with their giving strategies? And then we can talk more about why those things may not work for us or how they are working. But we got to start having these conversations. And I think the segmentation is part of the problem. And so creating those inclusive economies where everyone comes to the table, from the maintenance guy to the CEO, everybody has something of value to share. Believe me, they're seeing things that they have ideas, and we're not including that. And that's why we're missing out on multi-million-dollar opportunities for change, because we're only assuming that key people with key titles have the answers. And that's not true. All of us are gifted, and all of us bring some value to the table. So as you're growing your table and making your invitations, please remember that, to invite everybody and ask everybody what their opinions and perceptions may be so surprised. I'll never forget the guy at 3M who came up with the poster. I think it was a maintenance guy. You know, this is what we're saying, like, don't sleep the people who are walking around and assume they don't have fantastic ideas on how to save you money or make you money. We all bring something valuable, and it's not related to your title. So I want to thank these two amazing ladies for having this conversation. We can talk about this all day. We only as Eva said, we really just kind of nibbled, you know, scratched a little way at the surface. We didn't get to dig deep because this is only an hour, but we do invite you all to truly get involved, reach out and find out how you can start building or promoting this concept of inclusive economies. Thank you for all of our attendees, both on Zoom and Facebook Live. Of course, this is on Facebook Live. You can go back and review at your own leisure. Again, we're every Monday morning message, our COVID-19 weekly update, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern time. And also mark your calendars for Trending Thursdays tips every Thursday, 6:30 to 7:30, also Eastern time, both here on Zoom and Facebook Live. Everyone have an amazing Monday and a wonderful week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, VR. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
ladies.
Thank you.